name is Mr. Brown, Jim Brown, and what I'm going to do is show you, explain my career, how I got to where I was, some of the traits that I used, and some of the stuff that I learned from being just a high school, college student until I worked in Olympics at the higher level. And it wasn't just a straight shot. I had a lot of changes. But I really appreciate being here. I enjoyed talking this morning over there at the other school, and I enjoy talking with the young new generation that's going to come up and help sports keep it moving forward. My wife and I worked in Korea in 1988 and 1989. I came here as a sports director for the U.S. Army for all of Korea, and we had a great time, a marvelous time here in Korea. I've been up to the DMZ and been all the way down to Busan and all the different American installations in between. What I'm going to talk to you once again is my goals, choices that I had to make, my character builders, the experience that I had, the challenges I had, and then some of the obstacles that I ran into. What I want to talk first of all, these are some of my working traits that I started with. I always had a positive attitude. My attitude was always good. My parents were probably a large factor in that. They had a positive attitude. And what we could, what may be difficult with a good attitude, you can do it, accomplish it. Attention to detail. I use my finger. I'm so used to using a finger. The button is the. Oh yeah. Okay. I don't see where it. Oh, anyways, attention to detail. If you've got the mission, it's your job, you need to pay attention to detail. Do some research. If you got a mission to do, if you're doing marketing for sports, or if you're doing whatever you're doing for sports, and you're doing it, pay attention to detail. Make sure you got everything covered. Now, the next one, do not micromanage. If you're the supervisor and you've got workers doing it, don't get in there and tell them exactly what to do all the time. Let them do the project. Just supervise, watch it. If you think it's going to be a problem, they're going to run into a problem, at that point, you may want to step in and give them some advice. Otherwise, if they're doing it, they're doing the job maybe a little bit different than you would do it, just let them do it. Continue on. Don't try and micromanage them. Trust. You've got to trust. First of all, you've got to trust yourself. You're making the choices. Don't be in doubt. Once you've done your research and decide on, okay, this is the way we're going to do it, trust it. Same with your people. If you train your people and they start working, trust them. Let them do the job. Say yes. This is the big thing that got me into a lot of super situations, is say yes. If someone says, hey, I need you as the basketball coach. You think about it, okay, I'll do it. If you really need somebody, I'll do it. You may be out of your comfort zone. You don't feel confident in doing it, but if you research, talk to other coaches, you'll find out what you need to do. You'll say yes. Don't second guess yourself. Once you make your decision, drive on. Drive on. Don't second guess yourself. Don't look back and try and, oh, maybe I should have done it this other way. The other thing is use your experts. And you people do it quite well in the colleges. You've got the libraries, you've got research, books, and you've got professors and doctors here that you can talk to, get information, or you can go out to the field and get information. It's very easy to do, but you've got to do it. And that will help you in making your choices. And the other thing is give back. In other words, what I mean by this is if you're doing a job and you're progressing in the line of management or whatever you want to do, you're leaving some stuff behind. But then go back and help those people. Give some advice. May volunteer. I know my wife and I now are volunteering a lot in the different programs. But give back to the program that you had left or that you're doing. Any questions on that? Let's see. Okay, these are my early years. I was brought up in Rochester, New York. That's in the northern part of New York State. We're right on Lake Ontario. Across Lake Ontario is Canada. So you can't, as far as New York, it's not much further north. I was born in 1941. That makes me 71. We were outdoors. We were very active outdoors because there was no TV. There was no computer games. There was no internet. That hadn't been out. We still had an ice box. I don't know if anybody knows what an ice box is. The refrigerator took its place. It was a big cabinet in the house. On the outside of the house was a door that the iceman would put the ice inside, and we'd keep our stuff refrigerated in that. That's what we, when I was young, we had. Eventually we got the refrigerator, we got the washing machines and all this other, good stuff. A sailboat. My parents had a sailboat. This was up on Lake Ontario. And my brother and I would sail, but we had to wear a life jacket. Okay? We didn't want to wear a life jacket. We were halfway decent swimmers. But my mother said, you need to wear a life jacket. When we argued with her, and she said, well, if you can swim across the bay, and it was 2 kilometers. If you can swim across the bay, then you don't need a life jacket. Well, my brother and I worked hard, and eventually, by the time I was 7 years old, I could swim across. And then we didn't have to wear life jackets. We'd go in the sailboat and sail with the life jacket just stored in the sailboat. But that got us into swimming. That was my first sport I really got competitive in. And the other thing I did was in the Cub Scouts. Your Boy Scout program, that was the Cub Scouts. I learned a lot of skills there. But that was my early years, probably the same as most of everybody is. I was just one of many. Okay, at high school, in the summers I worked at a YMCA summer camp. I was in charge of a cabin. I had about 10 young boys, 8 to 10 years old in the cabin, and I was like their coach. Took them out and did their adventures and stuff. That was for summers. Then in high school, I played, I don't know if I get this thing working. Anyways, let's do it this way, huh? Okay, I played soccer, whoops, I swam, and I ran track. Hey, that's good. Those are the sports I did. And by my junior and senior year, I was all scholastic. That means I was all district. I was, there was 11 of us, the top soccer players. In high school, I played defense, but I was just one of the top swimmers and also track and field. And then at my senior year, I was athlete of the year for the high schools. The athlete of the year. So I was very good in sports, and I did a variety of sports. One of the things I wanted to do when I was in high school was go to Annapolis, that's the U.S. Naval Academy, and become a naval officer. But this was the first time I sort of had a setback because I got the appointment, but I couldn't pass the physical because of my eyes. My eyes weren't strong enough. This was back in 58, 59. And you needed good eyes. We weren't in Vietnam at that point. Okay, now I gotta... But that was my high school. Okay, went the wrong way. Okay, in my college. First university I went to was the University of Rochester. I was a math major. I went there for 2 years. I played soccer, I swam, and I ran. I didn't stay there because they raised the tuition and it was too expensive for me, and one of my goals was I didn't want to go in debt before I left college. So I transferred to Cortland. Cortland was a state school. See, it's the State University of New York at Cortland. and I went and moved into physical education, into the sports world. That's where I met my future wife, Lita, at college. There I only played soccer and ran. I was tired of swimming. I swam since I was 7, and I was just tired of it. And one problem with swimming, if you're training, you can't talk to anybody. You don't see anything but the wall or the bottom of the pool. It's a very, you've got to be very dedicated to the sport. But after you've swum so much, you get tired of it. So I just played soccer and ran. I was a soccer player of the year, and this should be 1963. I made some mistakes in the next slides because I was there to 64, 63. I was a soccer player of the year, and then at the end of college, I married my wife, or I married my sweetheart, who was ended up my wife, Lita. Okay. Now this is when I went to the school system. Received a job at Hamburg High School, as a middle school, and I went on to and I coached. I taught 4th and 5th grade boys physical education, and then I coached varsity soccer. That was my job. That's what I got hired for. As far as the phys ed, I had no problem with that. As far as the soccer, I really didn't have a problem. I knew what I needed to do. I had played it for quite a bit, and it was worked under several coaches. So I knew what I had to do, and the varsity soccer team that first year was very successful. We were undefeated, we had 1 tie, and we were the district champions. After the soccer season was over, the sports department head, director of athletics there, asked me how my basketball was. He was looking for a basketball coach for his JV team. I told him I had no experience in it except the coaching course at college. So I played like everybody else in the sandlot and stuff, but never really played basketball competitive. Well, he asked me to be the junior varsity basketball coach. So after a successful soccer season, I felt pretty good about that, and he's my boss, so I said, yes, I'll do that. And so I had 1 week to prepare before the season started. So I went to talk to the head coach who was doing the varsity, and he told, I asked him what I needed to do, how to develop the basketball players to make his varsity team. So he told me. Then I went over to 2 of the colleges up in Buffalo, New York. Talked to the coaches there. They gave me, well, first of all, they asked me what experience I had, and I told them. They said, well, you need to concentrate on 3 things. One of them is the basics. Seeing you've got the JV team, teach them the basics. The second one was get them in condition. Make sure they're in condition so when it comes to the end of the game, they're still playing good ball. And the third one was teach them defense. Teach them how to play defense. If you have a good defensive team, you're going to be all right. He said, as far as offense, it'll take care of itself. Everybody likes to shoot. Everybody likes to score. So he said, that'll happen. But not everybody likes to run back down and play defense. And that's what you've got to work with them with. So that's what I did that first year with the JV basketball team. And at the end of the year, we were undefeated. We were 18-0. No one beat us. We averaged about 50 points a game, and our defense gave up about 40 points a game. So they did very well. I was very proud of them. So that was my first year. I didn't do track until my last year. But that was my first year. At the end of the first year, I had a university ask me if I would accept a job as a soccer coach there. But I needed a graduate degree. So I applied. I looked at a couple of colleges, and I applied to Indiana University for my for graduate school. And I figured, well, after my second year of high school, I would go to graduate school. My wife would be working, and I'd finish up and get my degree. So anyways, second year, varsity soccer, we did very well again. We had one loss, but we were still district champions. The basketball team went undefeated again. I had a perfect record. So the 2 years I coached basketball, never lost a game. Very, very fortunate. And then the athletic director asked me if I would help him. He was the coach of the track and field. He asked me if I would help him coach that. And I did, so I ended up doing that. One afternoon in October of '65, I came home from soccer practice, grabbed the mail, and the top letter was from Indiana University. So I opened it up and read it, and I was accepted to Indiana University for a graduate degree, and I had a fellowship, so I was going to it would be cheaper for me to go to graduate school. The second letter was from the United States Army. They wanted me to go into the Army. That was my draft notice. I was being drafted. So, no graduate school. I ended up going into the Army. So my whole journey, this part of the journey, going into coaching and all my goals of being a college coach and maybe coaching at the Olympics or something like that, was just wiped out at this point. I was going to be going into the Army. Okay, serving my country. Because I had a college degree, I could go to OCS, Officer Candidate School. So I did the basic, and I did the AIT, the basic training, and then I went to the Officer Candidate School in Field Artillery. Once I graduated from artillery school, and I was second in my class and first in gunnery. So they kept me there, and I was a gunnery instructor for 2 years. I taught gunnery. Now, does everybody understand field artillery? That's the cannons and stuff. You understand that? Everybody understand what gunnery is? That's the computation. That's the forward observer out with the infantry. He sees the enemy. He sends on his radio. He gives the location of the enemy. Back at the battery where the guns are, we have a computer area where we plug in that information. And back in those days, there was no computers. We had to do it all by hand on the maps, compute the data. We used slide rules. I guess you don't use slide rules anymore, do you? But you use slide rules, and then compute the data, send it to the guns. They set it on the guns, and they fire the round downrange. And that's what gunnery is, and that's what I taught at Fort Sill. While I was at Fort Sill, we had our two sons, Joe and Will. Will is the oldest. Will's still in the Army. He's a lieutenant colonel in intelligence. And Joe now has a ranch up in Montana and is doing very well up there. While I was at Fort Sill, I played on the Army soccer team, and in the tournament in '68, I was the most valuable player. After teaching gunnery, I went to airborne school. I jumped out of airplanes, learned to do that. Yeah, exciting, yes. Go airborne. And then after that, I went to Ranger School. And Ranger School is, I think the guys who were in the Army probably know a little bit about Rangers. It's like you've heard about the Navy SEALs. Rangers is the same thing, but we don't do it in the water. We do it mostly on land. A lot of infiltration, going behind lines and stuff like that, setting up ambushes and so. But that's what I did up to that point. Any questions so far? This is my training and getting into my Army. Okay, my next assignment was Vietnam. I went to Vietnam. I was with the 4th Infantry Division up in the Central Highlands. Fortunately, it was in the Highlands. It wasn't as hot and muggy up there. We still had the monsoons, and it was still warm, but not that bad. While I was there, I was a forward support coordinator, our fire support coordinator. And what I did in that job, I worked with the infantry, and I was in charge of all the artillery, the Air Force, the Navy, and anything they needed to shoot into the area. I was the one who was making contacts and directing it. I did a lot of flying in helicopters for adjusting and stuff, and I also got some time in FACS, one of the Air Force spotter planes. So I had, that was exciting. It was very adventurous. I ended up receiving 5 air medals. I was shot down 3 times with their aircraft came down. Fortunately, helicopters auto-rotate, and it's not that bad a landing. It's a big bump in the air, but it's not that bad. And that was 6 months. The other 6 months, I was the commander for a battery. I had a firing battery, and I was the commander. Once again, in Vietnam, I was the captain. Right near our area of operations was a Korean unit. And I'll tell you, the Korean Army that was in Vietnam was outstanding. The North Vietnamese, when they came down to the south, would try to bypass the Koreans. They'd go around them because they just didn't want to go head-to-head with the Koreans. The Koreans were tough, were very good soldiers. Received many awards, 3 bronze medals for valor, the air medals, and some, several other medals. That was Vietnam. When I got back from Vietnam, I went back to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, career course, played more soccer. And then after the career course, I ended up going to the 82nd Airborne. Now that's the elite unit in the States. They're always on mission, so if anything happens anywhere in the world, they're ready to go. They get a call and they go to the airfield and they take off wherever it is. So they will be wherever they have to be within 1 or 2 days. But that's the elite outfit. 1/3 of the unit is always on standby, ready to go. 1/3 of the unit is in, what do you want to call it? Downtime, where they can go to take college classes, do maintenance on the equipment, get everything ready. And then 1/3 of the unit is always in mission training. They're out in the field training to get ready to go. And then it's a 3-month cycle, and you just keep rotating. So about every 3rd month, you can't go anywhere. You've got to make sure your unit knows where you are so they can call you, and then you fly out. And when I was there many times, I get a call 2, 3, 4 in the morning, go down to the airfield, and then we take off and either sometimes just fly around and then back land, or sometimes we'd fly and head out to some other installation or someplace else and jump in. But it was very exciting, very exciting. They didn't have soccer there, so I couldn't play soccer, so I played rugby. I don't know if you know what rugby is, but I learned to wax or grease my ears, use Vaseline on my ears, because I was in the scrum. I don't know if you know the scrum. I was in the 2nd line, so there's 2 guys ahead of me, and I'm hanging on to them, and my ears are between their hips, and I'm getting rubbed. But anyways, it was fun. I enjoyed that. From there, I went to Europe. I went to started out in Nuremberg, Germany, with the 1st Infantry Division. And initially, once again, I'm out of my comfort zone. They made me the Special Weapons Officer. So I was in charge of the nukes, the nuclear rounds. So I had to do the inspections and all this other stuff. Had the unit, or the platoon I had with me, had to be properly trained and stuff for that. So that was exciting. And then the other part of my tour, I was the battery commander for one of the firing batteries up on the border. We were located just underneath East Germany and the Czechoslovakian border, back when it was called Czechoslovakia. That was our mission area. There I played and I coached soccer. I got the soldiers, and we got a team together, and we did very well against other Americans. But when we played the Germans, they did a job of us. If we could keep it close, we were doing very good with the Germans. They were very good soccer players. Okay, that ended my military career. In 1975, I got caught up in the final rift. They were doing reduction in force. This is after Vietnam was over. They're trying to shrink the Army back down. So they got rid of a lot of people on the first rift. They got a lot on the second one, and then they were just sort of just sweeping the board on the third one. And I got caught up in that. I had a choice of either staying in the Army as an NCO or getting out and finding another job. So I checked. My wife and I, we talked about going back to Hamburg, New York. I'd go back to my teaching job, but. You know, thinking back on our Army career, you can't, if you go back to the place you came from, it's never the same. You just can't go back into the position. So we decided we'll try something new. So I applied for a job with the Army as an Army sports director in Grafenwehr, Germany. This is a big training area in Grafenwehr, or in Germany. I was the sports director, and I had about 5,000 soldiers. It was small there. Because about this time, after Vietnam, they built up Germany. And Germany had maybe 500,000 soldiers in there. But we had, in our little area, we had 5,000 soldiers and families, and I ran the sports program for them. There were 7 communities. They were spread out along the border. Once again, this is the border, East German border and Czechoslovakia. And I was in charge of, you know, some of my responsibilities was the budgeting, facility maintenance, supply, and then we also had, because we are in Germany, a lot of the American sports they didn't play. So we had to train our own coaches, we had to train our own officials. So that took some time, and I learned a lot about other sports because I had to train the people for them. One thing about budgeting, and when you get out, you'll find out about budgeting. And I learned this real quick. When you get a budget, and usually get it for the fiscal year, they'll tell you how much money you're going to have, whether it's, you know, $50,000 or $500,000. I discovered that if you spend 75% of it right away, right as soon as you get it, spend it, figure out what you're going to need for the year, and go ahead and spend it. Cover the whole year on the program that you've set up. So you've got that done. Because sometime in the future during that fiscal year, they may say, hey, we got budget cuts. We're going to take money out of everybody. But if I spent 75%, I got all my programs covered, I'm not going to be hurting. They can't hurt me. Where someone else who only spent as they need, all of a sudden they've lost most of their budget. So, and I found out in sports, if you buy what you need for the year, and then the commander says, hey, I want to have a taekwondo tournament, and that wasn't part of our program, and it's going to cost $50,000, you know they're going to come up with the $50,000. They're going to give it to me because the commander wants it. So that gives me extra money. So it worked out very well. Instead of just buying as each season goes along as you need it, buy at one time. While I was there, we did a lot of tournaments, all different type of sports, leagues, and then I hosted some European-wide championships. So let me get into that. Now this is where my can-do attitude, yes, attitude comes in, and this led me to the Olympics. I was in Europe at the right time. Vietnam had we stopped going into Vietnam, and they were building up Germany because of the Soviets and the communist bloc countries. So we were getting a lot more military in, we were getting a lot more money in, and I was just there at the right time. Europe decided, the sports director at the head of all of Europe for the Army, decided we're going to go into our championships again, start them all over again. The first championship was going to be wrestling. And I was one of the 7 command sports directors, and we had a meeting, and we're discussing the different championship, who was going to host what. Nobody wanted to host wrestling. So I asked them, what does it take? Because I was not a wrestler. I had no idea what was involved. And they explained it to me. I said, we can do that. So in getting ready for it, doing my research and stuff, I learned a lot about wrestling. Our tournament was very successful, and at that point I became what we call guru. I became the head wrestling person in Europe for the U.S. Army. I had no idea. But I was so if anybody needed any information about wrestling, they'd call me. And from the States, the National Wrestling Federation, they would call me. So I got in really tight with the U.S. Wrestling Federation. I played on a German soccer team. Played for 5 years with a German soccer team. 1 year with the youth. I was in my 30s then, and then I played with the old timers. If you were 35 or older, they had an old timers league. You played the games, had a great time. Then you had the big party, and it was even better. But it was fun. That was enjoyable. We did military triathlons. That's shooting, swimming, and running. And one thing I got in, we didn't have a swimming pools in Germany like you have at the Army post in Korea. So I had to get to the German towns around and get a swimming pool. Well, I got one swimming pool. They said they would host the swim, and so we were doing our military triathlon. We did the shooting on post, then we went to the swimming pool. And one of the competitors, he was a lieutenant from, he graduated from West Point. He was I think, ranked 5th in the nation in freestyle back then, and he was in the Army. So he was competing. Well, we got to the swimming pool, and there was, they had some Germans around, and we had some Americans, and we're swimming, they're getting their times for the competition. And this swimmer broke the pool record. He established a new pool record for the German swimming pool. So the next year when we were doing the same thing, they called me and said, "Hey, are you going to do the military triathlon again?" I said, "Yes." They said, "Is that lieutenant coming back?" I said, "Well, let me call and find out." And he was. He was. So after we did the shooting and went to the pool was packed. There was everybody, I think everybody in the town was in the pool wanting to watch this guy swim. And he come up to me, he said, "Mr. Brown, I'm not in the shape I was last year, but this is a good crowd." Well, I guess the crowd encouraged him, and he set a new record. He broke his last year's record in the pool. And the Germans were just crazy. They loved that. But that was that. I had a combat cross country. This is where they wear all their combat gear, and they run. You don't use bridges. You run through creeks, or you swim across the rivers, and then you go up hills and all sorts of stuff. But it's very challenging. It's 8 kilometers course. And one of the German clubs wanted to host it. They had a great place to do it, so we did it there. And then the Greek marathon, I got a call from our running association, and they asked me if I'd take a team to Athens, Greece to run the Greek marathon. I said yes, I would. And so I decided, I was running a lot at the time, so I decided I would run too. So I ran the Greek marathon and took the team there. And that was quite an experience. Any questions so far? All right. But my life is getting better. I'm doing more and getting out, and it was increasing my confidence in myself, and I was getting a lot of support, because the more things I did, especially with the Germans, the more help I got from the Germans. So it was a good time. Okay, this is the sports structure. Okay, we started out at the bottom level. This is a unit level sports. That's what you do inside the company or unit. They have sports competition. Usually they have a sports officer or sports NCO who conducts this. We at the sports director's job, we sort of support them with equipment or whatever they need to do. Then we have the intramural sports. That's where it's company against company, and this is run at the sports director's office. We run that. Then there's the post competition. That's one post against another post. And one of us at the post will run that competition, one of us. Then there's the command championships. This was the, the command championship in like Germany or the States or in Korea. It'd be all the top athletes would come to that, or the teams. And then the super athletes, once they're identified as a good athlete, they go to all Army, if they're in the Army. And this is where we run a camp, maybe a month camp, 2-week camp, depending on the sport. And then we have eliminations, and then from there they go to the armed forces. This is where the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, the Marines, all the services come and compete. And then the top athletes from that will go to the CISM. That's the international military. The Korean are in that also. All the militaries in the world come to that. And in 2015, the World Military Games will be hosted in Korea. Myungyan. In Korea. That's where it's going to be hosted in 2015. Every year they'll have competition in one of the sports where all the military people come. But every 4 years, and not an Olympic year, they have the military competition. And this is, most of the events are like the Olympic events, but then they'll have military events also. Parachuting for accuracy, more of the combat, cross-country, that type of stuff. But that's the structure that we have for our military. And as I went through, as I got into the thing, I learned more and more about that. Okay, this is at Fort Dix, New Jersey. I left Grafenwoehr, I went back to the States. There I was the sports and outdoor recreation director. I did that for 3 years. I got more into the hosting of the all-Army camps. They would come there, we'd host them. Boxing, wrestling, marathon team came there. Did a lot of camps. Burned a general run. The general at Fort Dix was a runner. He came to me with an idea that he wanted to race against, let all the soldiers run with him. So we decided we'd do we call it the burn the general. You got to beat the general. So he would start out front. He'd be out front, and we'd have one good runner with him with the guide on, with the 2 stars on the red. So they had the general's flags there. So everybody knew where the general was. He would run next to the general. And then everybody else would be maybe 100 meters behind him, and we'd have 1,000, 2,000 soldiers lined up, and some of their families members would line up. And then when we start the race, everybody knows the general's in front, and their object is to beat him, and it was a 3-mile or 5-kilometer course, was to beat him back to the finish line. And the soldiers loved it because they got a chance to see the general, run with the general, and if they're lucky, beat the general in the race. So they had a good time doing that. While I was at Fort Dix, I ran the Boston Marathon. I qualified for it. And then my best marathon time was 2 hours and 54 minutes. And I was 42 years old then. So I thought that was pretty good. I thought that was pretty good. Okay. From there I got an offer to go back to Germany and be the 5th Corps. That's V is 5th. 5th Corps sports director. I did that for 5 years. There we had 200,000 soldiers and family members, 14 different communities, and there I hosted a lot of this. USAR, EUR is United States Army in Europe. And then we did international competitions with the Germans. We had from Holland there, France, Italy would come. And also, once again, we hosted the officials and coaches clinics. But at this time, we had money, and I'd bring clinicians or coaches or officials from the states, from the universities, would come over and help teach. Like track and field, I had Al Bueller, and he was the U.S. Olympic coach at the Seoul Olympics for track and field. He came over and helped with the coaches and officials clinic. But we'd bring several people over. And this was a good time in Europe. We're probably at our peak. This is more in Frankfurt in Europe. I worked with the national governing bodies because I was right in Frankfurt. Most of the teams coming from the States would fly into Frankfurt. So I would say about every 3 months I'd get a call. They'd ask me if I could pick up the team there and if I would be the team leader for a team going into East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, or up in the Netherlands. So I would pick them up at Frankfurt. I would take them to one of the installations. I'd have workout areas for them. We'd have billeting all set up for them. And then we'd move on. We'd do that about 2 weeks until they got acclimated to the time change and the food. And then we'd move up wherever the competition was. So I enjoyed doing that. I did a lot with the wrestling teams that came over. And the bobsled, that was an exciting time. Bobsled Federation asked me if I would help them. So I ended up, they needed to move the bobsleds from the Frankfurt airport up to, maybe it was 100 miles north of Frankfurt. They had rented the German bobsled area. The World Championships were going to be in November, and in America, our bobsled areas at Lake Placid and Salt Lake City weren't going to be open until November. So the bobsled needed a place to train and have their trials. So they rented a place, and I got the bobsleds up there. I delivered them newspapers. I was up there. They were up there a month. I was probably up there, twice a week, helping them out, making sure everything was squared away. I'd bring the reporters, some of the American reporters and the news, the TV people up there to help them, for advertisement and stuff. At the end, I was up there for their last day of trials, and when they all finished up, they asked if I had the person from our TV network was with me, and they asked if we wanted to ride on a bobsled. Well, my answer was yes. So we got the chance to ride on a bobsled. I was the second man on the bobsled, and I asked what I have to do. And they had a place where you could put your feet and you hang on. And the only thing they said is keep your helmet off the driver, because the driver is in front of me. Keep your helmet off the driver so you don't push his head down. He's got a seat to make these turns. So okay, that's easy. So we get in the bobsled, and they didn't have us push it down. We sat in it, and they pushed us from there. So we're going down, and I'm watching, and we're turning, and we're getting faster and faster. I'm starting to get tears in my eyes as we're picking up speed. And all of a sudden my head is just moving forward, and I'm pulling it back, and it's moving forward, and pulling, and I'm not concentrated on the scenery anymore. I'm worried about my head hitting the driver. And by the time we finished, the next 2 days, my neck was sore from the ride. But it was unbelievable experience. It's fast. It's fast. So I did the bobsled. Then I worked with the German Wrestling Federation. Helped them. We had a lot of good wrestlers in the Army, and I've got, with the Federation, we found teams, German teams for them so they could wrestle with the German leagues, and the Germans loved it. I was on the German committees for the Frankfurt Marathon. Helped them out with the marathon. This next one, Niedereschenbach, that's a town north of Frankfurt. They wanted to do a 80K Niederlauf. Nieder is the name of the river, and Lauf is a German word for run. So it was like a river run, but it was called the Niederlauf. I worked with that because I had the manpower, I had the soldiers, and we provided water stations, guides, and all that type of stuff for this run. And then also during the time we were in Frankfurt, our son, Will, went on to college. That was our older one, and then our younger one, Joe, went into the U.S. Army. Okay, from there I came to Seoul. I was in Frankfurt, and I got a call, asked me if I would be interested in going to Korea and being the sports director for U.S. Army in Korea. I said, well, what else does it entail? He said, well, you'll also be the liaison between the U.S. Olympic Committee and the Army for the '88 Olympics here in Seoul. So I said, talked to my wife and called back. I said, yes, we will go. So we got here, we got into Korea, I think it was March of '88, and got into my job. And one of the first things I had to do was brief all the U.S. coaches that were going to come with the teams to the '88 Olympics, and let them know what we as the Army had to offer them as far as training facilities, transportation, food, whatever they needed. You know, we could help them with it. Because as a coach, if you're going to play, I'll use basketball. If you're going to play basketball on Friday at 2 o'clock, you want to practice at 2 o'clock today, and you want to practice at 2 o'clock tomorrow, so that you're acclimated to that time. And with the Olympics, with so many teams, so many countries and teams, you only have so many venues to train in, so many gymnasiums. So and they will schedule. So you may not have, your schedule may be 8 o'clock at night, the practice. So what the teams would do, especially like the basketball, they came to us and they would practice in the gym, our gyms. The taekwondo, and this is the first year they had taekwondo, as it was a not official sport, but it was a, what do you call it? A guest sport. Anyways, it was part of Seoul said, we're going to do taekwondo because taekwondo is our sport. So we had taekwondo. And our American team practiced in our facilities. The boxing team practiced in our facilities. Some of the runners came out and ran because we don't have the traffic as you do out here on the highways. So they would run. Some of the swimmers came over and swam. But we provided that. Also, we had our restaurants and stuff inside there that they could practice and then go eat. They didn't have to go back to the Olympic Village. And talking about the Olympic Village, that's one interesting thing that I didn't know about, was they have all the countries from the world come to the Olympics. And they have food for all the countries of the world, so that they have their food, same food. But the problem is, the ones who prepare it are in this case, was Korea. So most of the foods were prepared and they were spicy. And a lot of the countries, they can't, that upsets them. As I noticed when we had the Olympics in '96, like the Koreans and some of the food, teams coming from countries where they like spicy, they had a hard time with the American food or the American preparation. They still had a lot of the Korean type foods, but it wasn't prepared the same. So it was a problem. And that was the problem they had. So they found that they could train and eat. They didn't have to go all the way back. And the food was prepared by Americans. So it was better for their system at the time for the Olympics. And then I was, during the Olympics, I made sure that they had what they needed. I set up, like the women's basketball team won the gold medal, so they wanted a banquet, so I set up a banquet for them, things like this. But it was very, very educational. I got to know a lot of the Korean national governing bodies because of our US OC, I had to learn, the counterparts of the Koreans. So it was very, very educational for me. And another thing is, after the Olympics, some of the Koreans, two of the Koreans were in the Olympics, wanted to go to Chicago to train Korean Americans in Chicago. There's a big community in Chicago. So my wife and I took care of these two Koreans. She would teach them the English for what they needed to do on the mat, and then I would take the two Koreans over to the American high school, and they would work with the American wrestling team. So they had to speak English. So that forced them to learn the English so they could teach it to the American wrestlers, and that worked out very well. And then they went back to Chicago, and they didn't have too many problems, because most of the Korean Americans in Chicago, I won't say most of them, but a good share of them speak Korean very well. But they also speak English, and some of them, they were born there, and that's all they know is the English portion. But I worked with that. The triathlon. Triathlon was going to be a new sport in the 92? Yeah, 92 Olympics. Triathlon is going to be a new sport. In order for a country to send a team to the Olympics, you have to have 3 national championships before then. So in 1989, Korea was going to do their first triathlon. Well, they called me and asked if there was any Americans that would like to participate. And I said yes, they would, because we don't have the big areas where you can do the bicycle and some of the events. So we couldn't do any triathlons here. So I said yes. So they invited me to a meeting with them. So we sat down in the meeting and listened to what they were doing. And at the end, they asked me if I had any questions. So I asked 3 questions, and then they asked me to be on the committee, because they didn't know the answers to the 3 questions. So they asked me to be on the committee. So I worked on the triathlon committee on that for the first year, and they had a very good triathlon. We did a lot of traveling. As the sports director for Korea, I had to go down to Busan, Daegu, different installations all over. Did a lot of work up near the DMZ. And then most of our sports staff at our facilities were Koreans. So we did a lot of training with the Koreans, staff members, on our type of sports and what to do, how to handle this type of stuff. And then at the end of the tour, I got a commander's award. And it's a very, not many are handed out. I was very thankful. I was very humbled by that, getting that award. Now, from here, this was probably my peak, best times I had. I had a job offer. I got a job offer, a call to go back to Europe to be the sports director for all of Europe, for the U.S. Army for all of Europe. And that was what I always wanted to be, so I said yes. And that was my mistake. I shouldn't have said yes, because I ended up in a bad situation. I got back to Heidelberg, and that's where the headquarters was, and I was the U.S. Army Europe Sports Director. My mission was, because the Army decided that they were going to cut budgets, reduce the number of soldiers. It was right after the communists, the Soviet Union split apart, the wall came down. So they decided, hey, we don't need 500,000 soldiers over here. So they started cutting down the number of soldiers. And the general over there decided, hey, let's get rid of some programs. So sports was one of the programs. They wanted to just get rid of championships. You just do the intramurals and stuff. So that was not what I wanted to do. That was not me. But started that out. When we went into when Iraq went into Kuwait, and then we went over as the UN forces. Desert Shield and Desert Storm is what it was called. I still had a secret clearance with the military, and so I was called, and I worked in their Tactical Operations Center. Spent quite a bit of time there, plus doing the sports job. But the sports job at that point was starting to get reduced. So I quickly, as soon as I could, I left Germany and went to Fort Benning, Georgia, where we live now. And I was the sports director for Fort Benning, Georgia. One of the reasons I went there was was the All-Army Wrestling team was located there, and they asked me to come and help them out. So I went to Fort Benning, worked with the All-Army camps. We did a lot of All-Army camps because Fort Benning is where they train the basic trainees. And they have a lot of barracks, and usually there's free, a barracks is always free. So I could put in all the athletes, do our camp, do our competition, and then move out. So we always had room for them. I did the Armed Forces Championships and camps. We're the best from the Marines and stuff. You know, Air Force would come. We have our competitions. And then I worked with the cycling because Fort Benning is a big area, and a lot of the area is just maneuvers, so there's a lot of roads that nobody uses. The only time they're used is if they're going to truck troops out there for maneuvers. So we could do a lot of cycling there. There wasn't any problems. Like we went by a cycling here, and you've got roadblocks all the way. You've got police, you know, all over the place. Where at Benning, we didn't need anything. It was all done. We just had to put out markers and stuff. I helped with the USA Wrestling. We did youth programs, competitions and youth programs. Every year we have a Military Appreciation Week. We started that. It's like a mini Olympics for the military at Fort Benning. And then I worked the World Freestyle Wrestling Championships in 1995. I was a pairings official. And then in '96, I worked the trials for the Olympics for the USA. And then in '96, the Olympics. I was a wrestling, worked the pairings, and I was on the computer. My job was, once the pairings were done, I checked them, and then I put it into the computer, and the computer was set up so the screens were in all the locker rooms, the coaches' room, for all the athletes and coaches. Not out where the spectators were. I took care of the athletes and coaches. Because I had maybe 4 or 5 matches up, so they would know when they were going to wrestle about what time and on what mat, so they could prepare themselves. But I did that when I was at Fort Benning in '96. Okay. Also from '96 to '97, before I retired, I was on the Board of Governors for USA Wrestling. How are we doing on time? Oh, we're all right. We're good. This morning I had an interpreter. You people are very good. Had an interpreter, and it took almost twice as long. Okay, I'm going to go back to this slide. One thing I want to mention, the 1996 Olympics. When I was a young kid swimming, I thought, man, I'm going to be an Olympic swimmer. I was a Western New York swim champion. I was 13 years old. I was 100 meters. I was a swim champion. I was 3rd in the state. I'm thinking, hey, I'm going to be an Olympian. That's what my goal was. But I never got to the Olympics as an athlete. When I was coaching, like at Hamburg, I thought, well, maybe I could be a coach at the Olympics. Never got to the Olympics as a coach, but as administrator, an official, I got to the Olympics. And in 1996, I worked at the Olympics. In 1975, when I said yes to hosting the championship in wrestling, from there, I went from there all the way to the Olympics in wrestling. And I never wrestled in my life. I never, up until that point, I did nothing with wrestling. But because I said yes, I ended up at the Olympics. So it was a good yes, and it was a good time. This is in Columbus, Georgia. I retired in '97. From the end after the Olympics until 1997, for 1 year, I was on the Board of Governors for the USA Wrestling. I retired in October. I didn't do anything in November. I thought I'm going to enjoy retired life, but I got bored. And so starting in December of '97, I started substitute teaching. I taught in the high schools, the elementary schools, the middle schools, different subjects, didn't matter. but I enjoyed teaching the math, I enjoyed phys ed. And when I was teaching the phys ed, they enjoyed having me as a phys ed teacher because I knew all the sports and I knew how to organize stuff. So I got quite a few calls as a substitute teacher. I also taught sports administration until 2001. I would teach for the Army. I was in Korea here in 1999, training, once again, the American sports people. I was in Europe I think it was 2001, and also in 98 also, in Europe teaching. And then I taught in the States. They'd bring all the sports people into Florida, into Orlando. Yes, and we teach there. When I was substitute teaching, I met some of the track coaches, and so I talked to them, and I said, well, I'll help you with the track meet, because their track meets were slow, long processes. And so I started, volunteering my time, helping them with track meets, and I used the system I used, and track meets were shorter, much shorter, quicker to handle, easier to handle. And so more and more teams would ask me if I would help them, more and more coaches when they assisted. So finally, they made me the track coordinator for our county school district for high school track and field, and also for cross country. So I did that up until last year. And last year when I turned 70, I said, hey, give me some young people and I'll train them and they can do the job for you. So now I just sort of volunteer again when I'm in and out, when I'm not traveling. But my wife and I, we do a lot of traveling. We volunteer at the schools, in the elementary schools, 3rd grade. This past year, every Tuesday I went over to the elementary school, and the students would come and read to me. One at a time, read. We do about 20 minutes. They'd read to me, and then they'd take their test for the reading, and then they'd go back and they send me another one. I had 3 boys I was working with. My wife did the same thing, and she had 3 girls she was working with. And we volunteer at the nursing homes. And one of the events I love is a sports event. I call it NASCAR, but it's the little wooden cars with wheels, and you have a track, and you just run them down the track. So we had a starting area, set them up, and what I would do is I'd make the cars, just make them out of 2x4s, wood, cut them, and sand them off, and then take them in, and one day, these are senior citizens, most of them are in wheelchairs. They would paint them. They would paint their cars. We'd put their name on the bottom, paint their cars, and then we'd let them dry, and then the next day I'd put the wheels on, and then the 3rd day we'd race. And they'd line up along the side of the track in their wheelchairs, and they'd cheer for their car and have a good time, and enjoy doing it. Everybody would get at least 2 races, warm up, and then we'd race and do elimination until we got the champion. But they had a great time doing that. In the process, when I get back, we have our next races. So volunteer that, and then also we've been doing a lot of traveling. A lot of traveling. My grandparents were from Lithuania. I don't know if you know where Lithuania is. It's Estonia, Latvia, up by Poland, Russia, up in that area. So last year we went to Germany, visited our son who was still in Germany at the time, and then went to Lithuania, visited there. I'm over here now. We do a lot of traveling. We go out west to our son in Montana, visit with him. We do Canada, but we do a lot of traveling. And we enjoy doing that. And I think that's the last slide. No, there's one more. Okay. So in my life, in my career, put it this way, my career, I started out in schools, just like everybody else, in schools. I got my first job, doing very well in the first job, and then I got drafted. Went into the Army, changed careers. Was doing very well with the military life, and then came the reduction in force. And then I got a job with the Army. And then my career really picked up, and I got to one of my goals is working in the Olympics. So, you know, I feel it's a lot of it's attitude. You have to be at the right place at the right time. But if your attitude is good and you have no problem getting out of your comfort zone, doing something that you've never done before, you know, you're going to progress up this ladder to success. But you've got to you've got to say yes. You've got to have a good attitude. You've got to try things. And this last one is a statement. We start our careers as many. You know, we're all college grads. We start as many. And as we journey through our life experiences, making our choices, and meeting our challenges, we finish our careers as one. We're one individual. I'm Jim Brown. You know, nobody else has done what I've done. You know, you in 50 years from now, you'll have your own career. You'll have done stuff that nobody else has done. You'll be an individual. You know, you start out as just like everybody else. You're a stamp, you're a number, but eventually you work up into your own identity. But you've got to be positive. You've got to work at it. You just can't okay, whoops. Oh, that was good, Brown.
End of class.
End of class. Oh. All right. But you've got to put, did that shut off automatically too?
You just turned it off.
Oh, I turned it off? Anyways, that was the end. but you got, you know, it's up to you. But you people are young, energetic. You're the next generation, you know, to work in the sports and whatever type, you know, way you're going to do it. You're mostly in the administration side, but they may ask you to be a coach. You know, you may be working one place and they're short a coach. And they may ask you, you know, that's fine. You can do it. You don't have to have knowledge, a lot of, you know, that. You can just go out and get your own knowledge. But if you do that like I did in basketball, you got to start with the basics. You actually have to teach yourself first. So I know in basketball, I had to teach myself how to shoot. You know, this finger is pointed at the basket, and when you do your shots, you know, you just don't go and throw it up there. You got to aim it. You've got to learn how to dribble without looking at the ball all the time in both hands, right and left hand. You've got to learn the basics. So and I found out that it's easier to teach somebody. It was easier for me to teach skills in basketball than it was in soccer. Even though I had the skills in soccer, but I had a hard time going from the skills I had down to the basics, which is what they needed. Where in basketball, I didn't have the skills, so I had to learn the basics, and it was easier for me to teach it to the players. Sometimes it's easy, you know, better if you have no knowledge, because you're going to have to learn it yourself and then teach it. So anyways, I hope this goes back together. Any questions? Anything else you want me to cover on this? I mean, I've got a lot of experiences. You just hit these.
What is that?
Oh, I brought this in. This is put out by Publix. Publix is one of our food grocery stores. And in the States now, a lot of the grocery stores are pushing sports. They just sort of highlighted soccer, but this, if you read it, it's for all sports. And it's put out by a food store, a food chain. And this is in the southern part of the country. But it's very good. And more of the food industry, our other industries, are putting out for sports. Because America is getting too heavy, too big, especially the children. And so they're doing a lot more with this. And I know you're into more of the administration part, this stuff. This is like marketing, but it's good information. It's a good idea to get, you know, going wherever whatever mode you're going into. I don't have no idea, you know, and you don't know where you're going either, probably, from here. But it's interesting, and it's I can get this together for you.
So in the army, you taught sports, right?
Pardon?
You're a coach. You're a coach in the army, right?
When I was a soldier, I was not a coach. I coached, like in Europe, I coached the soccer team. But when I was a soldier, I was an artillery officer. Okay, I was an artillery officer, I was an airborne, I was ranger. So I wasn't into sports at that time. I worked with the sports, I volunteered for the sports. But then when I got to be the Army sports director, I was a civilian. Then I got back into sports. I did not do much coaching, mostly it was administration. Setting up budgets, setting up leagues, running the programs. In Europe, and we had to contact the officials. Same with in Korea, we had to contact the officials so that we'd had officials. In the States, it's not so hard because we have associations. And you just have to call up the association, tell them, here's my schedule for soccer or for baseball, and they provide the people for it. Otherwise, we had to do that.
What was your level, grade?
Pardon?
What was your grade?
I was a captain.
Captain.
Yeah, I started out as a lieutenant, then second lieutenant, then first lieutenant, and then captain. And I got out as a captain. Did 9 years. Anybody else have a question? Or any other subject?
Well, I have a question.
Yes.
Because we talk much about your career, despite the fact that you would have always been having a good attitude, a positive attitude, always saying yes, never second guessing, and also sticking to the details. Despite you all have those values, even if you do have those values, were there any time that you actually failed or you made the wrong decision?
Yeah. One time, there's a lot of little things that we did wrong. But the biggest thing was leaving Korea to going back to Germany, to Heidelberg. Because I didn't know what I was getting into. And when I got back to Heidelberg, I assumed we had a big program and we're going to really get rolling and continue to roll as we were. But that wasn't the case. The thing I did wrong is because I always wanted that job. So when it was offered to me, I said yes. But if I had said, well, let me call you back and then research it, see what's happening over in Europe, if it's changing, and it was, I would never have gone back. I would have stayed here. That was probably my biggest mistake. My other ones, like getting drafted, I had no choice. When the RIF came, I had no choice. It wasn't choices of mine. The choice was, what am I going to do about it? Not sitting there and say, oh my God, my life's over. I said, okay, now what do we do? And you just have to decide. Because we thought about going back to Hamburg, teaching back there. I'd get back into coaching, but more we thought about it, no, we got away from that. Let's try something different. But yeah. But my biggest problem was I went back to Europe. I should not have. I should have stayed here and then gone back to the States. But because it was fun here. We skied. We ran ski races, cross-country skiing, downhill skiing races here. All sorts of events. We had an enjoyable time. And one thing we did, after the Olympics, for a year, there wasn't much of an organization as far as the Olympic venues. And because I was trying to get a hold of the velodrome for the bicycle to see if I could bring some of our bicyclists over there and use it, but I couldn't find anybody in charge. There was maintenance people, but there was nobody in charge. The same with the track, the Olympic Stadium, when you use that. Because it would be a great experience for the soldiers to run on an Olympic, playing field. And so Dr. Chung Tong-gu, he said, well, go ahead and just use it, if there's nobody in charge. So we used the velodrome. It was free. We used the Olympic track. It was free. The only thing we couldn't get was a swimming pool because they opened it up for swimming. But we could use most of the other venues, and it didn't cost anything. Until then, a year later, they got organized and set up an organization, an administration. Then you had to sign up, make reservations, and it cost you money. So we had it nice for a year. But that was a good experience. But it's been a good career, and I'm happy that Jessica asked me to come to Korea and do this. You know, I almost said no, but I thought, oh, I'd love to come back and see. We had a great time here. And so I said yes, and it was good because I had to go back in and get all my paperwork and see what, you know, try to find out what I do. So now I know more about myself now than I did when I was doing it. So it was good, and I'm happy I'm here. Any other questions? Well, I appreciate the time, and hopefully, you know, you're the next generation out there that you can, you know, keep sports at a high level. That's right. You got the World Military Games coming in 2015. Maybe you'll get involved with that. Don't know. So, I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you.